with where we left off, and this is the main story of this week. Avner. You remember, Avner was the chief of staff, the leading military figure on the House of Saul. He backed and supported and sustained Ish Boshet, the one remaining son of King Saul. Other than Avner, Ish Boshet would not have been able to sustain his kingdom. Reminding you, this green area was all Ish Boshet, the House of Saul, and this pink area was the one tribe of Yehuda, Judea, that David was ruling over, that included Yerushalayim, Beit Lechem, Bethlehem, Hebron, Beersheba, but all the rest of Israel was still under the reign of the house of King Saul. Both sides of the Jordan River, there's the Jordan River, the so-called West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and Judea, and then the East Bank we talked about. We also talked about the East Bank last Thursday when we talked about the story of Yiftach and the king of Ammon. Anyway, so Ish Boshet is in charge, basically. And that's where we left off. But things were going to change here. Shaul Pilega Shishmar Ritzpah Bataya. As we said at the end of last week's class, King Saul had a concubine. We said a concubine is a woman who essentially does not have any of the protections of being a wife. She has no ketubah. In the event of a divorce, there's not a divorce because she wasn't a wife, so she's not entitled to alimony or child support or anything like that. Terrible insecurity. And we talked about that at greater detail. Why would a woman do that and accept that? Anyway, Ritzpah was the Pilegesh or concubine to King Saul. And we also learned last week that the widow of a king, no one else may marry her after the king dies for the rest of her life, other than another king of Israel. We talked about just the unseemliness for those of us who remember 50, 60 years ago when President John Kennedy was assassinated, leaving behind his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, who was a national treasure, the national heroine. Everyone loved Jackie Kennedy. And then after a certain number of years, she married Aristotle Onassis, a Greek tycoon. And it actually, it's not for us to judge the next person's life. We're not in her shoes, we don't know. But in terms of the way the public reacted, it was highly unseemly that the widow of the President of the United States was marrying a Greek national. And I don't want to even spend a lot of time on that. But to give you a feel of how the Queen of Israel simply does not marry anyone else, even another Jew in Israel, although rabbinic authorities say she may marry a subsequent king. Well, here you've got a concubine. She's not quite a married woman, a queen. What is she? What is her status? But whatever it is, Avner, the chief of staff for the House of Saul, apparently was intimate with her. Not that he married her, she wasn't marriageable in the sense, and she wasn't a wife, she was a concubine, a widowed concubine, so to speak. But Vayomer el Avner, Madua bata el Pilegesh avi. Ish Boshet harshly says to Avner, essentially accusing him, and it seems from the text that he is correct, that he's not falsely accusing. It never quite seems explicit that Avner concedes that he was intimate with the concubine, but it seems so. And Ish Boshet harshly calls Avner on it. Madua bata al Pilegesh avi. How did it come that you lain with my father's concubine? And Avner was furious. But Icharli Avner ma'od al divrei Ish Boshet. Avner was just enraged. Charon af is rage. It's the strongest form of ka'as, of anger. But Ichar af li Avner ma'od al divrei Ish Boshet. He was enraged that Ish Boshet called him out on it. Bayomer harosh kelev anochi. There are a lot of ways to understand this wording. He says, am I the head of dogs? So one way to understand it is he's saying to Ish Boshet, if I was a very low-ranking officer in your kingdom, simply the chief dog catcher, you would not talk to me that disrespectfully. So how dare you talk to me this disrespectfully, I, who basically sustain your throne, I who keep you in power, I who made it possible when your father died and David arose to hold you on to power. How dare you? There's another opinion to read it that he's saying, if I were your enemy's chief dog catcher, if I were a low-ranking officer for David on the other side, you wouldn't even talk to me that way. Instead, look who I am. Harosh Kelavanoch, you might have head of dogs. Asher Lihuda, the head of the dogs of Judea. That is to say, am I King David's dog catcher? Hayom eseh chesed and beta Shaul avicha. I mean, for goodness sakes, I do only chesed, kindness, to the house of Saul, your father. El echavi el merehu, to his brothers, to his entire extended family and his supporters and colleagues. David, I did not allow you to basically fall, excuse me, fall into the hands of David. And now you're calling me out for sinning with this woman today? It does bring home, by the way, and it's not unique to Jews, it's unique to, it's the whole world. It's the role that men become enthralled with certain women, and things lead to things, and kingdoms come down from this. I mean, really, the entire Catholic Church, Catholicism ruled all of Europe, except maybe Germany. England was Catholic. All of Europe was Catholic. England would later, that's the 1400s, 1300s. England would later, no one expected it in the 1300s, would conquer the world. England would take North America, the 13 colonies, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, India, Palestine. India, the sun never set on the British Empire. Imagine if England had stayed Catholic. We know that South America mostly is Catholic because it was settled by Spain and then Portugal, who, when King Manuel in 1497 married the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, so Portugal followed the way of Spain, and they were all Catholic, and they spread it all over the world. Imagine if England had been Catholic, the whole world would be Catholic. What happened? Henry VIII, without getting into too much of it, his wife, Catherine of Aragon, couldn't give him a son. She gave birth, I think, like 6 times. Each child died like in the first month of birth, or died as a stillborn. She had only one child that survived, a girl, and Henry VIII wanted a boy. And so at the same time, he ended up getting involved with another woman. And then that woman didn't end up giving him a boy. And another woman, another woman, another woman. And because he was Catholic, he wasn't allowed to marry. He wasn't allowed to get divorced from the wife who wouldn't give him a son. So he asked the Pope to have the marriage annulled. And the Pope, for political reasons, refused to annul the marriage. He said, I'm not going to annul it. So you can't get divorced because you're Catholic. So Henry said that I'm changing the religion. I'll start a new religion. It's exactly like Catholicism, only the king's allowed to get divorced. And that was the Anglican Church, which in the United States, after we broke away from England, so it's not nice to call your religion Anglican. The whole idea is you broke away from England, so they called it Episcopalian. It's the same church. And it all started over a man and a woman and trying to get a baby, and Catholicism became Protestantism, and half the world became Protestant. It's just an amazing thing how the world was affected by a man, a woman, a child. And this just goes on and on. And here you see what's about to happen is the House of Saul is about to fall. because a man was intimate with a concubine and got called out on it. Unbelievable. That's how life is. It's not unique. It's real life. That's why we learn Navi. We learn Navi because it's real life. And we learn values and we learn what happens to other people. The Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, teach us the laws and the way our ancestors lived with those laws. Masa Avo Siman Labanim, the way that our ancestors lived, become models for us to understand and interpret and apply in our own lives. And the Navi, as we saw last Thursday when we were learning Yiftach and the issue with King Ammon over the eastern side of the Jordan River, that these same issues come up 3,000 years later. And you learn today how to live based on how they lived then. And this is how they lived. And you learn lessons on what to emulate, and you learn what to avoid. So Avner is furious. How dare you talk to me like that? Me? I took care of you. But if and now you're attacking me for this woman, he invokes a vow. Thus may God do to Avner, he says. That's how they vowed, like he swears. I'm swearing, he says, right now, that which God Almighty had promised to David, namely that David would become king of Israel. Ken Eselo, I'm going to make it happen. That's it. That's it. Party's over. I'm going to make it happen. All because he's been called out over having been intimate with that concubine. I'm going to transfer. I'm going to transfer the kingdom from the House of Saul, and I'm going to establish the throne of David on all of Israel, not only Yehuda, Judea, Midon va'ad Beersheva, from Dan all the way down to Beersheva. Here's Dan, the northernmost part of Israel at Mount Carmon, right up there near Syria, all the way down to Beersheva in the Negev. From Dan all the way down to Beersheva. Not only Judah, but all of Israel. I'm going to make him the king over everyone. That's how angry he was, and that's what he decided he's going to do. Let's look at some commentaries. So that took us through Pasuk Yud. So let's go back to some commentaries here. First of all, Shaul Pilegesh. So Saul had a Pilegesh, we said. Malbim comments, Shemin Hadin, Pilegesh HaMelech Asura Lehidyot. Technically, under the law, a king's concubine, even though she's not his formal wife, is forbidden to any other man. Ki ein mishtamshim b'sharvito shel hamelech. You're not even allowed to use the king's sword while he's alive. He's got armor, he's got a sword. Everyone's got his own sword. Is one sword all that different from another sword? Well, maybe a person likes the feel of his sword. And if you follow baseball, baseball players become very attached to their bat until the bat breaks. Let's say it's made out of wood, and often it breaks when it's hit the wrong way with a baseball. But a baseball player likes to use his bat. He gets the feel of his bat. He just he rubs a little bit of pine tar on it to get a good grip, and he doesn't want to use someone else's bat. And when his bat breaks, it becomes like a whole trauma. Well, a king gets a certain feeling of his sword, and no one else is allowed to use the king's sword. So, how much more so, not allowed to use the king's concubine? Mitam kavod melech. It's a matter of the honor of the king. The Avner lo chosh lezeh. Avner, on the other hand, he just didn't feel that place here. He felt it's a concubine. It's not a wife, and the king's not alive. It's not like he's going to look at me. I got to look at him tomorrow, and he's going to be offended. He's not in the picture. No one else is spending time with her. Ish Boshet is not involved with his father's concubine. Uval pilegesh hamelech ki ilu gamelav yoto in yanei hamachut. Avner felt, I'm kind of like a king myself. I'm the one who's sustaining this kingdom. Ish Boshet isn't strong enough. I'm the guy. Bihiyot hu hamishenet al hamachut. V'zechar al Ish Boshet kizem morad b'mlucha. And it enraged Ish Boshet because he knew deep down he's not the pillar. Avner is the pillar. But he is the king, and it's just not tolerable. Rav and therefore he fought with him about that. Radak, another great commentator, we're going to hear both of them today, both Radak as well as Malbim. We're going to be covering them both. And so Radak says, that basically Ish Boshet suspected of Avner that he's intimate and being intimate with King Saul's concubine. And if Ish Boshet was correct in his suspicion, it really did devolve on him. It was incumbent to call out Avner on it for the honor of his father. The ode, ki asurahu adam. And as we just said from Malbim, the concubine of Saul was forbidden to any other man. You're just not allowed to, enos in amanato shel melech, you're not allowed to marry the widow of a king. And even though Ritzpah was not literally the wife, only the concubine, nevertheless, she had been intimate uniquely with Saul. No other man. Only she had been with only Saul. So she was like his widow. Ba'od, as I said with Malbim, you just don't. If you're not allowed to use the king's sword, you can't use the king's wife, the king's intimate woman. And therefore, Avner was just furious. So Malbim continues discussing, where Avner says, "What am I, like the head of a dog catcher?" Ritzolomar, what Avner is saying is, as a king, you have to treat with respect your officers, even the most minimal officers in your kingdom. They're sustaining you, they're your support staff. You have to treat your support staff right. You can't talk down to people that are keeping you around. Because they're faithful to you. And they serve you. And therefore, all the more so, the king should be treating with respect the chief of staff of his military, the most important guy that he's got. Frankly, you would even treat the chief of staff of the opposing side with respect. For example, if the defense minister of Israel, Gallant, comes to Washington, D.C., he's treated properly. And if Lloyd Austin, the American defense minister, the Secretary of Defense, goes to Israel, he's met with respect. Not only because Israel and America have mutual interests, but you treat people of significance with significant respect. And even if they're from the other side. All the more so, so all the more so, Ish Boshet should be treating Avner, saying, you should be treating me with extra special respect for two reasons. Mitzad Godel Ma'alato, first of all, because I'm important. I'm the defense minister. I'm more than I'm the chief of staff. The defense minister is a political position, actually. The chief of staff is the guy in the field. Like in Israel, you have Gallant is the defense minister. He's the politician in the cabinet. And Herzl Levy Halevi is the guy in Gaza who's in charge of the military. Umitzad avodato, not only should you be treating me with respect on grounds that I hold such a high office, but the service that I provide for you, for goodness sakes, I'm I'm the guy that keeps you around. And you're treating me instead as though I have two failings, I have two lackings, whereas I have two strengths, a high office and maintaining you in power. You're treating me like I'm the head of dogs, that I'm like the least. And secondly, that lo rak velo shel chelecha, rak shel chel asher lihuda. And secondly, as though I'm not even your defense minister or chief of staff, but the other guys from Judea. So you don't, I mean, velo zot elakiyasita zot shalom. Frankly, you're not being smart. You should pardon my saying so. If you were smart, if you were smart and you really think I've done something so terrible, you'd hold it to yourself, you'd stay quiet, and you'd wait for a later time that you don't need me as much. You would wait to bring it up at a time that I'm weaker politically and that you're stronger without me. But now you actually need me like crazy. And now you attack me? Consequently, he just was very, very upset. And Radak says similarly, Mal'ig ilu hayiti rosh klavim. You're talking to me as though I were a dog catcher, as though I were the head of dogs. And afilu lo hayiti mamune al klavim, shahayiti nikra rosh kelev. Frankly, even if I only were the dog catcher, even so, vod afilu shevet Yehuda, she'atas soneh. And not only that, even if I were only the dog catcher of Judea. I mean, for goodness sakes, just being an appointed person. You don't talk to me like that. So stop it. Lo hayalech levazoti, kol kach hayom. You had no business insulting and embarrassing me. It's interesting how he's turning it around. If he's been intimate with the Pelegish, with the concubine of Saul, instead of apologizing. So there are different ways to understand it. One is that he hasn't done anything, and then would explain the rage totally in light of everything we've just learned. But it's interesting that even if he has, he's just enraged. Halo chesed gadol asiti ad hayoti im beit avicha shersakti beveito lahamido b'malchuto. I mean, look what I have done to sustain you. It's just outrageous. And so with that going on, he says, that's it. I am going to sustain and raise up the house of David. Malbim speaks about this, where, as Avner says, he invokes God as a vow that what God swore to David to raise him up as king of Israel, Cain Solo, now I will do that for him. If I do not do that for him, in other words, I will do that for him. In other words, Malbim says, you realize what Avner is, he's having a sudden realization, what they call in German an Aufklärung, a sudden clarity coming to him. You may recall, if you were with us a few weeks ago, we were learning that Avner actually had received a prophecy from God that David would be king of Israel and not Ish Boshet. But if you remember that class from about 3-4 weeks ago, Avner interpreted a verse, a pasuk, in the book of Bereshit, Genesis, where God makes a prophecy to Jacob, Yaakov, our third father. By then, Yaakov already had 11 sons, only one more to go. And in God's prophecy to Yaakov, who had just left the house of Lavan, his father-in-law and uncle, with Rachel and Leah and his 11 sons and his daughter Dinah and everybody. And Yaakov was concerned he's going to go past the land of Esav, the brother who wanted to kill him. And God said, don't worry, I will protect you. I will be with you. And you will have, kings will come from your loins. And many understand that as meaning, don't worry, your 11 boys are not going to die. You're not going to die. You're going to come out of this fine. Not only are you going to survive, you'll have children, you'll have grandchildren. Not only are you going to have grandchildren, they'll be kings of Israel. It's going to be good. Don't worry. But Avner interpreted it on another level. Kings will come from your loins. Avner understood that that God was saying, I will yet give you another boy from your loins, and kings will come from him. And the word kings is plural. So we learned that Avner interpreted that prophecy from God, that promise from God, that Yaakov would have yet another child from whom kings would emanate. Only one more child came from Yaakov, Benjamin, who was born when Rachel died in childbirth near Ephrat, on the road to Ephrat at Bethlehem. So Avner interpreted that God was telling Yaakov that Benjamin would be the procreator of kings, but there only had been one king, Saul. And Avner understood that if David now rises to become king as prophesied, as he had been anointed by Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel, then there would be only one king from the house of Benjamin. But Avner understood there was supposed to be kings, plural, from the house of Benjamin. So he believed it was his responsibility to sustain Ish Boshet and coronate and make him a king, to fulfill the prophecy that more than one king would come from Benjamin, and then David. Here and now, even for Avner, we're being told, as he takes a vow, as he makes a vow to Ish Boshet and says, I've had it, I'm enraged. I now swear, he says, that I will bring David up. I will bring the house of David. What he is saying is, I believe right now, having fulfilled God's prophecy and promise that kings, plural, would come from Benjamin, it has been done. You, Ish Boshet, had your throne. And now it clearly is time. I take this as the sign from God that you so wrongly are attacking me, either wrongly because I didn't do anything, or wrongly, I did something, but it wasn't for you to criticize me. I take it that right now it's time to change kings and to put David in. So with that, that's the explanation that we're finding here, that Malbim says, Shro'eh, that Avner is saying, I now see, Shezeh Siba Meyet Hashem, Shemloch David. This is a sign from God that it now is time for David to be king. Shro'eh Shehu Husame Hashem Le'emtsai. I actually see, Avner is saying, I see that you, Ish Boshet, have been placed as the middleman, Emtsai, in the center, in the middle. You have been placed in the middle, Ligmor Hadavar, to finish the deal, to conclude the deal. It's as though God Almighty himself had undertaken a vow that I, Avner, now should make this happen. I see now it's the time for the prophecy to happen and for God's greater plan to come together. As Radak says, Tachtav Lemi Eretz. So, okay, we'll come to that Radak in a moment. But what Avner is saying is, basically, I see it's now time. Okay, so we go back to 2 Shmuel, Perek Gimel, chapter 3 of Sefer Shmuel Bet. And he says, I'm going to bring in David. And that's it. I'm bringing in David, and I'm going to make him the king. From Dan, all the way up north to Beersheba, all the way down south. And Ish Boshet, what did he respond? He responded nothing. He was terrified. He was terrified. The whole idea was that he realized that indeed Avner holds him in power. And without Avner, he can't maintain his power. And he was just terrified. It's hard really to describe it. It's that, Putin had a brief moment about a half a year ago with that guy Prigozhin, who was the head of that Wagner group, and he threatened he's going to take down Putin. So that moment, you got to see whether Putin was afraid of him and whether Prigozhin really was a threat to Putin. Putin wasn't afraid of him. And within a few days or weeks, Prigozhin met the fate of everybody else that gets on Putin's wrong side. They die mysteriously, usually fall out of windows or airplanes. Putin wasn't afraid of him. Sometimes a military general is so powerful, especially in these military dictatorship type places, where they sustain a figurehead who's the king, and we now find, by very virtue of the fact that Ish Boshet, who called out Avner for being with that concubine, when Avner blew up at him, Ish Boshet doesn't reply. He can't talk to him. He's unable to respond. And that lets you know right now that he's finished, because he can't so much as even respond. Lo yachol od lahashiv el Avner davar, could not say anything in reply. Mir ototo, he feared him that much. So Avner gets to work. Vayishlach Avner malachim al David tachtav limor lemi erupts. And Avner immediately sent out messengers to David. By the way, look carefully at the wording. The Hebrew, this is very important. This could have been written one of two ways. It could have been written by Yishlach Avner malachim al David, and Abner sent messengers to David. It also could have been written by Yishlach le David malachim. He could have said David first before Avner. Our rabbis tell us that the message that he sends David is titled, you ever see like a formal memo from Dov Fischer to Denise Fisher, Navi class, or memo from Denise Fisher to Dov Fisher, Navi class. Remember to optimize your screen. Who's the memo from? Who's the memo to? In the standard format that we're used to, it's usually first the from, then the to. But the rabbis note in this memo that Avner sends David, he writes him a note from Avner to David. And the rabbis teach, and we're going to look at the text of the rabbis in a few moments, he should have said to David from Avner. He should have put David's name first and his own name second. You have to be so careful when you speak, when you use language. Of course, you're not supposed to use dirty language, profanity. But even when you speak properly, in Judaism, you have to be very, very careful when you speak. It's a very important set of halachas of how you talk. Do you know that in the yeshiva world, when we talk to a rabbi, we refer to a rabbi. I'm not saying you should call me this way. I'm not on that level. But when we would talk to the rebbes in our rabbinic ordination smicha program, you would never refer to a rabbi as you in the second person. Like you wouldn't say, I have a question. Yes. You said earlier in class XYZ, you would never say that. You would talk to the rabbi, to his face, in third person. Excuse me, Rabbi said the following. My Rebbe was Rabbi Tendler, let's say, Rabbi Moshe David Tendler, Zechat Tzadik Livracha. So if you're in class, if I had a question in Gemara, excuse me, yes, Rabbi Tendler said the following, and I wanted to, I'm looking at him. The natural way you would talk would be, excuse me, you said the following. That's how I would talk to my professor. That's how my law students would talk to me. They would call me, first of all, Professor Fischer. Professor Fischer, yes, you said da-da-da-da. But when you talk to a Rebbe, to someone on a high enough level, you talk to him third person. And it sounds weird until you've seen everybody else around you doing it. And then you realize that's the way you talk to the Rebbe. Excuse me, the Rebbe just said the following. Yes, and the Rebbe doesn't say, well, excuse me, you're talking to me? It's understood. That's the way we talk. The Rebbe talked that way. I would talk that way still if he wasn't necessarily my Rebbe, but if he's on a level if somebody goes, okay, he's not with us now, but like if someone goes to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they would send people to the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Crown Heights. He'll give you a brach, he'll give you $1. When you sit down, you don't say, "Hi Rebbe, how you doing?" You'd say, "Excuse me, the Rebbe, I'd like to thank the Rebbe for making time for me." Or if you sit with Rav Soloveitchik or with the chief rabbi of Israel, "I'd like to thank the Rebbe, I'd like to thank the Rav for making time for me." So you have to be very careful how you speak. You have to be, and frankly, even by non-Jews. In the non-Jewish world, you talk to the king. How do you talk to the king? You see it in the movies. I never got to meet a king. But if you see in the movies, they refer to the person in second person, Your Honor. Frank, that's how they talk to a judge. Okay, you stand in front of the judge, and when you get really established, and you've been in front of that judge a lot of times, and you're like a regular there, and they know you and you know them, and it starts off, "How you doing, counselor? Thank you, Your Honor." You normally start second person. "Thank you, Your Honor, for asking. My family's well, Your Honor." And you normally don't just say you. Got to be careful. There was a judge in the Eastern District in Fresno. I was warned after I finished law school, or as I was winding down law school, I was applying to be a clerk, a federal law clerk. As you all know, or many of you know, I ended up in Louisville, Kentucky with the Honorable Judge Boggs in the Sixth Circuit. But I interviewed a few places. So I interviewed in Fresno. There was a particular district court judge. That's the trial level. I ended up on the appellate level. A district court judge in Fresno, and I was warned, don't call him judge. That, like, let's just make the name Smith. Let's just say the name Smith. It wasn't his name. Don't say judge. Like, of course, you're not going to call him by his first name. You're not going to call him, let's say his name is Tom Smith. You're not going to call him Tom Smith. You're not going to say, "Hi, Tom, thanks for meeting me." But don't even say, "Hi, Judge Smith." He doesn't like to be called judge. He likes to be called Your Honor. And if you call him judge, forget about it. You won't get the clerkship. So you have to know how to talk to people. Same thing with me. Ellen Zichrono Livracha would get very offended. There were one or two people who would call me Dov. And I go by the name Rabbi. To my family, I go the name Abba, Dov, to my wife. But Rabbi, of course, my emails come from Dov Fischer. My emails come from Dov Fischer. Why? Because I'm also sending emails to law students. So I'm not saying it from Rabbi Fischer. So why don't I say it Professor Fischer? Because I'm sending it to Shul. So Dov Fischer, everybody. But people know to call me Rabbi. People don't call me Dov. Ellen would get very upset. Zichrono Livracha would be very upset if somebody would call me Dov if they weren't family and just because they got emails from Dov Fischer. So why am I going to all this? Because the rabbis tell us Avner committed a grave sin. And we're going to see the text of the Midrash by addressing, and he's bringing an email. He's sending a message of the highest, greatest message to David. Fabulous news. I, the chief of staff of the opposing side, am turning over to your side. Have you ever gotten such a good news? Have you ever gotten such great news? But because he addressed it from Avner to David, instead of to David from Avner, God regarded this as a grave sin. So he sends him this message, and the message is, Lemi erutts, who owns the earth? Korta britcha iti, v'hinei adi imach. God Almighty. That's who owns the earth. I'm asking you now to koreit brit, make a covenant with me, v'hinei adi imach, and behold, my hand shall be with you, lahaseve lecha et kol Yisrael. I shall bring all of Israel behind you. All this will be yours. No more green, all pink, or no more pink, all green, but you will have all of Israel behind you, the entirety of Israel. I'm offering you that because God is the one, and this is the time. Vayomer tov, ani achrot itcha brit. And David said, wonderful, I'll make a covenant with you. Ach davar echad anochi shoel me'etcha lemor. But before we enter a covenant, there's one thing we have to straighten out. Lo tir'eh et panai, I will not meet with you. You shall not see my face to pursue your intended covenant with me. Ki im lifnei haviachat Michal bat Shaul bivoacha lerot et panai. Unless you bring with you, when you come to see me, my wife Michal, the daughter of King Saul, the late King Saul, who was taken away from me and given to Palti ben Laish. She is my wife. She was seized away from me. I want my wife back. If you really are honorable and going to be loyal to me and breaking from the House of Saul and shifting allegiances, you will prove it by bringing Michal from the House of Saul, the House of Saul who took her away from me, and bringing me back my wife. Ach davar echad. He says, this is the Malbim. Ba'asher chashav David machshavot mirosh, ba'ad sof shelo yidmeh ka'eved mored ba'adonav, shemashmid beit adonav, u'molech tachtav b'chazakah. He wants to make clear, David wants to make clear in a public way, this is not a military coup. I am not taking over from Ish Boshet and the House of Saul militarily. Rather, it is from the House of Saul that you, Avner, are coming to me, and you're bringing Michal. So everyone sees I'm not the one initiating and launching a revolution, but you're coming and bringing her back to me. You're conceding, the House of Saul is conceding of its own accord, rak ketofes malchut al pi navi, that rather it is now time to fulfill the prophecy of the prophet, bi'al pi din uvahaskamat Yisrael v'zigneim, and that this is being done as a matter of proper law propriety in the eyes of and before all of Israel and all of their elders. Ratzah sheyashiv lo et Michal. David wanted them to return Michal, his wife. Shemitzad zehu chatana melech asher lefanav, because that reinforces that he's actually a proper successor to King Saul over all of Israel, even over the House of Saul, because he's Saul's son-in-law. So he's not just someone who was coronated and anointed by the prophet Shmuel, but actually he's kind of like next in line after Ish Boshet. Saul, who did Saul leave behind? He left behind one son, Ish Boshet, and David is kind of like his son-in-law. He is a son-in-law. David wants everyone to see. Not only am I married to Achinoam and to Abigail, the Carmelite, and to Ma'acha, the daughter of Talmai, the king of Geshur, the Yafat Toar, and not only am I married to the other three wives, and I've got all those other sons, I am married to Michal. I am the son-in-law of King David. I actually have standing of some sort. Not to mention that I was coronated or anointed by Samuel the Navi. And I'm being handed over the throne by Avner, the chief of staff, the Gamratza, Shelo Yitraesha Avner Bolafanav Kesar Hamored B'Macho. And David, furthermore, did not want people to feel that Abner was a Benedict Arnold, that Abner was a traitor committing treason in the truest form of treason, namely, you present yourself as loyal to one side, but secretly turn coat to the other side. David wanted a very public transition. He wanted Avner publicly conveying, I have ended my loyalties to the House of Saul. I am transferring openly to the House of David, not as a secret spy, not as Benedict Arnold, who only gets discovered through accidental counter-espionage, but I'm coming out very, very forwardly and saying, the best I could compare it to, it's a little bit silly, but a little bit serious. It's like in American politics when people change parties. Doesn't happen often, but every so often, someone changes a party. You'll have a United States senator who's a Republican and declares himself a Democrat. There was someone, I think, was it Schweiker or someone in Pennsylvania? Well, it was someone, whoever it was, maybe someone else. There was it was 50 to 50, 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats, and the Republican declared himself a Democrat. And then sometimes it goes the other way. They've been trying for 3 years to get Joe Manchin to jump parties over to the Republican. It happens. And the governor of West Virginia was a Democrat. He was elected as a Democrat. Then he jumped over as a Republican. Now he's going to run for Senate and Republican. So sometimes, but that's not treason. And it's not even disloyalty, because very often they talk Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat, and then he came and he said, I never left my party. My party left me. I don't want to get into the politics per se, but the idea that sometimes a person, that's different from treason, where everyone thinks you're going to be voting that way. And on the day of the vote, they understand it's going to be 50 to 50, and Kamala Harris is going to break the tie. And shockingly, one of the Democrats, without warning anybody, votes the other way. That's like a stab in the back. So David wanted very much, these are real people. This is a real story. This is not just like in it once upon a time, many, many years ago, and they lived happily ever after. This is like a real thing. And he wants people to see it's being done as properly as possible, as openly as possible. No dishonesty, no disloyalty or treason. So I want Abner marching forward. If you're coming over, I don't want you coming as a traitor. Rather, you're going to come publicly, and you're going to bring my wife, and it will be understood by everyone there's no way you possibly could be coming over to me in Judea with Michal if it weren't on some level with the permission of Ish Boshet, with his consent. There's no way you'd ever be able to get her out of the House of Saul's kingdom if Ish Boshet, to some degree, did not give the word to other people, let her go. After all, you who are so highly ranked up in the Saul house is going in the House of Saul, and you're going to be coming, and it's going to be understood this was all legitimate. And so that's what's going on. David is saying, I am willing, but you have to bring my wife. You have to bring Michal. I want to be reconnected with Michal. Okay. So let's just take this a little forward more now. 3:12 with Radak. Okay. So we had left off with Lahavir Malmacha. Okay. 14. Let's just get this one. Okay. Okay, let's move forward for time reasons, and let's move forward more. I just want to be sure I get it all in. Okay, great. So let's go to 14. Vayishlach David Malachim el Ish Boshet ben Shaul Lemor. This is all very open. This is all very, very open. David sends messengers to Ish Boshet. Tina et ishti et Michal asher erasti li b'meya arlot plishtim. Give me my wife, Michal, back, whom I engaged. You may remember, I can't take out the time for it now. The engagement was not a ring. I don't know whether you remember. King Saul wanted David to die. And so what had happened was, if you remember, Saul said, you could marry my daughter, Michal, but the price of the engagement, the dowry, I want you to bring me 100 Philistine foreskins. I want you to kill 100 Philistines and bring me their foreskins, with the understanding being that David will get killed trying to do that. And since David will get killed trying to do that, Saul will be killing off David. In fact, David went to war against the Philistines, killed them, and brought 100 foreskins and paid the dowry. I would compare it a little bit, not being silly, to the Wizard of Oz. Remember the Wizard of Oz? Where he tells Dorothy or whatever, bring me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch, which is equivalent to saying, kill the Wicked Witch. He didn't say kill the Wicked Witch, he said, bring me her broomstick. The only way he's going to get the broomstick from the Wicked Witch as if they liquidate her, as they used it. It was a pun that we kids never understood at the time when they explained it. They threw water on her, and he said, "Oh, you liquidated her." So David brought 100 foreskins and fulfilled the obligation and married Michal, and that's what he's saying. I haven't forgotten. And when you marry someone by paying 100 foreskins, no one forgets that one. Like maybe you've been to a wedding in your life. Maybe there's some wedding you've been to in your life where even 10 years later, I'll never forget that wedding. Remember that wedding? Oh my, I'll never forget that wedding. They had the chief rabbi of Israel, and they had the president of the United States, and they had magicians, and they had comedians, and they had the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra, and it was such a big thing that they even had the Hamas Philharmonic Orchestra. I'll never forget that wedding. So in the same way, it's like you don't forget a wedding where under the chuppah, when the rabbi says, bring 2 witnesses, okay, let's see, what's he going to give the lady? And he brings 100 foreskins, and he asks the 2 witnesses, do you see it? And they say, kosher, mekudeshes. So anyway, David says, I want my wife back, who I married with 100 foreskins. Vayelech ish, vayishlach Ish Boshet. Ish me'im Paltiel ben Laish, and Ish Boshet did so. Ish Boshet gave over Michal. So again, this is not Benedict Arnold stuff. This is not surreptitious and secret treason. David confronts Ish Boshet from the other side, demands his wife. Ish Boshet concedes, takes Michal. We learned previous class, Palti ben Laish, Paltiel never touched her. So there had been no violation. That was the marriage with the sword in the bed between him and Michal, so that he never would touch her. And Palti gave her up, Vayelech isha haloch uvacho achareha ad bachurim. And he cried. He followed her as she was being taken away from him. So Isha with an Yud. The word Isha, Aleph Shin He, means woman. Aleph Yud Shin He means her husband. Ish Shala. That's why there's a little dot, a mapik He, a little dot in a He. If you have the word Isha, Aleph Shin He, there's no dot. That means woman or lady. Aleph Yud Shin dot He, mapik He, that means her husband. Vayelech ita Isha, and her husband Michal, not literally her husband, her man, walked with her. Haloch, he walked uvacho and cried. Achareha abachurim. Vayomer elav Avner lech shuv. Vayashov. And Abner, that strong, mighty, muscular chief of staff, he didn't like watching a man cry. And he basically looked at Palti and said, it's enough already. Go back, shuv. Go back. And Palti's not going to go and confront Avner. If Ish Boshet does not confront Avner, neither will Palti. And Palti goes back. That's the end of his relationship with Michal. And the rabbis again tell us in Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Yoter Amud Bet, in the Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin, folio 19b, that Palti was regarded as a great, great tzaddik. And that's why his name was Palti, but the rabbis say earlier he was called Palti, but in the end he's called Palti El, Palti of God. The word El means God, because God took his own name, God, one of God's many names, and added it to the name of Paul, and honored Palti for having been so righteous, never having touched Michal. And Palti took care of her and was her custodian and never did that which was forbidden. Udavar Avner haya im ziknei Yisrael lemor, and Avner was public and met with the leading elders of Israel, not Judea, but the other 11 tribes. Gam Tamol, Gam Shilshom, Hayitem Avakshim et David Lamelech Aleichem. All these years you've wanted David to be king over Israel, right? And I have been the obstacle. I have sustained Ish Boshet as your king. Tamol Shilshom, in the past, Hayitem Avakshim et David, you were requesting that David be the Melech Aleichem, be the king over Israel. Be Atu, and now Ata with an ayin, now Asu. So let's do it. Let's all do it. You all should do it. Ki Hashem Amar El David Lemor, because God said to David as follows: Biyad David Avdi, Hoshia et Ami Yisrael miat plishtim. It will be in the hands of my servant David to save my nation Israel from the Philistines, umiyad kol oivehem. This is what God has said. I wanted David, not Ish Boshet. He's the one whom I have designated and anointed to be the one to save the people of Israel from the Philistines and their enemies. This is what you have wanted, and it's going to happen. Vayedaber gam Avner b'osnei Binyamin, and Avner went particularly to the most politically problematic place, the internal tribe of Benjamin. Okay? So the tribe of Benjamin is more problematic than all the others because, after all, it's bad enough or challenging enough to now tell everyone else that David will be your king. But now he's got to pass the word to Benjamin. It's over. The kingship, the throne, the monarchy is leaving our tribe, the tribe of Saul and Ish Boshet, and a new king is going to be brought in. So he tells Oznei Binyamin, the ears, he speaks to the ears of Benjamin, Vayelech gam Avner ledaber ba'oznei David bechevron. And likewise, after making a speech, it's like a campaign. Now there's a presidential campaign. So Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going from state to state, Michigan, Wisconsin, and they're going from state to state trying to line up the votes and trying to win the votes in the allies. And so that's what he's doing. He's campaigning. And just as, let's say, Biden goes to Michigan and makes promises to the Arab vote and the Muslim vote, and then he goes to, I don't know, New York, maybe he's making promises to Jews. I wish Jews in New York cared as much about Israel as the Arabs in Michigan care about Gaza and Hamas. But they're campaigning. So first he goes to Benjamin, because it's like real life. It's real life. This is what people do. He's got to win everyone over. He's got to prepare everyone. So he's laying the foundation. He's winning public opinion. So he goes to all over Israel, and he prepares them with changing kings. I'm handing it over. You've always wanted David. The time has come. Now he softens up Benjamin, and he campaigns in Benjamin, and he tells them the time has come. We're switching. And now he goes to Jerusalem because he knows people are going to be suspicious. And you'd say, why does he have to campaign them? They'll be thrilled. He's going to come and make David the king. Why does he have to win them over? He has to win them over that they should trust him because he's associated with the other side. So he's campaigning. Trust me. So he goes to Oznei Binyamin, and then Gam Avner ledaber, Vayelech Gam Avner ledaber, and then he goes ba'oznei David bechevron. He then goes to the people of David in David's capital. David's capital, you remember, is right in the center of David's region, Hebron. So he goes southern Israel, Binyamin, one side of the border, and then to Hebron, and he lets everybody know. Israel, and he lets everybody know this is happening. Avner al David Hebron, and Avner, it happens. It really, really happens. Avner comes to David. Avner, the chief of staff of the House of Saul, who sustained and raised up Ish Boshet to maintain his throne over the 11 tribes other than Judah. Abner comes to David in Hebron, the Ito Esrim Anashim, and he is accompanied by a coterie of 20, an armed force of 20, a retinue. Vayas David la Avner v'la Anashim asher ito mishteh. And David makes a huge, huge party and celebration honoring Avner. It's like in American politics and other politics, when an important world leader comes to meet the president of the United States, they often have a major banquet. And they invite the president and his ambassadors and his consuls and his retinue. and all the United States senators go, and the cabinet members, and they have a big banquet. And they take out the china, and they take out all the fancy stuff. So that's what David does. Take out the china. They take out all the fancy stuff. And they make a mishteh. They make a tremendous, tremendous party. Vayomer Avner al David, Akuma, ve'elecha, ve'ekbetzai el Adoni HaMelech et Kol Yisrael. I have come here, and I'm gathering for my Lord the King, Adoni HaMelech. He's referring to David, not second person as you, Y-O-U, but is referring to him third person. I'm gathering to my Lord the King, at Kol Yisrael, all of Israel, v'yachretu et chabrit, and all of Israel now, not only I, will engage and enter with you into a covenant. Umalachta b'chol asher ta'aveh nafshecha, and you shall reign as king according to all that your soul desires. Vayishalach David et Avner, vayelech b'shalom. This was an extraordinary moment in Jewish history, and David sends Avner back to the community of Benjamin, and Avner leaves, vayelech b'shalom, and he leaves in peace. This is the high point. In many ways, it is the high point of David's kingdom, and at this moment, with David having been coronated by Avner, I'll take a question in a moment, but at this point, I'm going to play that song.
David melech, melech Yisrael, David melech Yisrael, David melech, melech Yisrael, melech Yisrael, Vayvekaya, Vayvesema, Semeto, Mother, 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 to, Vayelanu, Kol Yisrael, hey, la 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 la. La 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 David melech melech Yisrael, David melech melech Yisrael, David melech melech Yisrael, melech Yisrael, Kalekaya, Sema Sema Do. Mother, 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 Tov, Ayelanu, Kol Yisrael, Amen. La 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 la.
So I want to thank everybody for having been part of our series of classes that have taken us to a high point in Jewish history, the coronating of King David and the rise of King David to be king over all of Israel. We're going to take a 1-month spring semester vacation. That's what we call it in law school. As I said, I've got some medical stuff to take care of, and then we all have be with God's blessings, Pesach, if Mashiach hasn't come first, and L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And God willing, if Mashiach has come, we'll continue in Jerusalem. Otherwise, we'll continue more locally. God willing, at the beginning of May, we'll send out email reminders, and everybody